My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas. Sonia Elijah, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you, Jeremy, for having me on your show.
It's a great
sorry
pleasure.
About the dog barking in the background.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Have you been to my side of the pond?
No, but I would love to travel to South Africa. So if you were inviting me, I would definitely be there.
Well, the time now is winter, so I wouldn't recommend coming now. Although you're from the UK, so you're quite used to horrible weather.
We are, yes. We're very, very accustomed to the rain and the gloom. But actually, as I look out the window now, it is sunny. So that's nice.
Well, it should be. I mean, isn't it summer now?
Yes, it should. But that does not guarantee good, warm weather in the UK, even though it's, we're in May.
You and I were just chatting before I hit the record button about vitamin D. And I was saying that we don't have much to offer in South Africa, but sunshine we have plenty of.
Yes, that's so good. Yeah, that's why it's such a good, it's such a pull, isn't it, to go to places where they have, guaranteed sunshine.
Well, you cover a lot of dark stuff. How's that for a segue? From sunshine to darkness.
I like that. I like the juxtaposition there.
Sonia, let's start with this question. Why did you leave the BBC?
Well, the BBC, I was there as a researcher in documentaries, and I really did enjoy my time there. But this is quite some time ago. But then I went to, explore the US and lived in Canada and worked for productions over there. So, there wasn't a particular reason for me leaving at that time.
But you were at the BBC, which, I mean, it's pretty much mainstream. It's the establishment. How did you go from that to where you are now?
I know it is a bit of a leap. I always loved production, and documentaries was always sort of one of my, loves, really getting involved in that. And I got some really good training at the BBC for that, and in research, and did some filming and all of that. So it was a really good experience. The journalism, I would say, really came out of the abject failure of the mainstream media to do any kind of decent coverage on what was going on back in 2020, right? So my sort of I have an analytical mind. I would say I'm quite a critical thinker, and I just knew things were not right. And I thought, well, I will do my own investigations and research, and that's what I did. So sort of probably starting 2021 was when I began my investigative reporting, and which has culminated in my book, 311 Viral Takeover.
We're going to come to that in a moment. I just want to quickly go back to COVID. It's now 2026. Why are we still talking about COVID?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because it's so relevant, because the landscape that we're living in now is kind of the fallout from 3/11. And I use that date, 3/11, is that, March the 11th is when the World Health Organization declared COVID a pandemic. And I really see that date as a civilizational turning point, because the biosecurity framework that was set up, sort of, the temporary measures, has become codified, permanent in the laws that we're seeing now. Take, for example, even the Online Safety Act in the UK, the EU's Digital Services Act, this great push for digital IDs that's going on right now. That's all out of, post 3/11. And the rampant censorship that has unprecedented, all of that comes into play. So even now, as they're discussing, the hantavirus, right, and how there should be widespread PCR testing, you've got characters like Deborah Birx, the former COVID task force coordinator in the US, advocating for PCR testing. So we are still living it. And we know just actually a few weeks ago, the UK government pledged $1 billion for pandemic preparedness. So it's there, and it's not a matter of if, when it will. It's like it's going to happen. None of it has been dismantled. We're still living in it. And I just think it's the rise. My book I write a lot about this rise of digital authoritarianism, and that is right coming out of 3/11. And we are living in that today.
Before we go any further, Sonia, 3/11, why is it written like that? It makes me think that it's the 3rd of November. You're British. Why did you switch the numbering around? Just because it sounds better.
Well, I was going with 9/11, right? September the 11th. Yes. So yeah, of course. It is. Yes. It's the American date. And I did live fair amount of time in the US. So, so there is a parallel I see between 9/11 and 3/11.
Yes, of course.
And obviously I can sort of talk about that. But, if we look at 9/11, what did we see come out of that? We saw this sort of, a disruptive event, a crisis resulting widespread fear, and out of that, expanded powers by the state. So with 9/11, you've got the rise of the Patriot Act, you've got this sort of surveillance going on, you've got sort of state surveillance of citizens. But what did we see coming out of 3/11? We saw citizen compliance with the state. 3/11 is another disruptive event and fear being weaponized. And then you have expanded powers coming out of that. The Coronavirus Act that was passed in the UK, and obviously the international equivalents around the world. And just how so there is a real sort of parallel can be made there. And so
no, I got that. I was being facetious. I'm merely making a comment on why the Americans have to flip the month and the day. It doesn't make any sense. It should be the day, month, and the year. I don't know why they switch those, but I get your parallel. If you could go back to 2019 before all of this, would you?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't, even though my book, the timeline starts at 2019, because I think that's actually quite a critical year. And I go into many key events that took place that we could talk about later if you wanted. Yes. No, I'm very happy with sort of what I know now, because it makes us much more resilient, doesn't it? And to all the experiences that we went through, I do believe makes you a stronger person, perhaps. And I'd like to think that more people have woken up to what has gone on. And, my book, one of the main aims of the book is to sort of provide people the knowledge and truth, and so they won't be fooled next time.
I think something that I was alluding to now in my question is, why did you start on the 11th of March and say not, I don't know, with the events that were unfolding in 2019 already, like Event 201?
Oh, no, I do. The book title is 3/11, so it's not like all the events. Yeah, so if you read the book, it's about 500 pages. I talk about decades before. I talk about what was going on in 2001 and the rise of the biodefense industrial complex. 3/11 is the title because it's that pivotal date where we see this disruptive event taking place and then ushering in everything else. So the book definitely speaks to many events that happened pre 3/11.
Okay, so I would agree with you, obviously. I suppose you could say I've also woken up. Something wasn't right in 2020. I think most of us kind of felt that something was very wrong, and we started kind of collectively trying to piece together the puzzle. One of the things that I realized is that these things are interconnected and they're big. They're not isolated events.
Yeah. No, they all sort of work lockstep, don't they? Yeah. Which is what I write about. I think it was the perfect storm that they created, right? And the censorship machinery is part of that. And it, major sort of psychological operations were unleashed on the public, on the unwitting public. So I definitely write about all of that. And the, just running up the 2019, all the pandemic simulation exercises that they were running, these key officials that they would, it's really very, very telling. And the recommendations that come out of that, let's say, for example, Event 201 that happened in the fall of 2019, you have them, really pushing for the public sector and the private sector to work together to counter misinformation, what they deem, of course, as misinformation, their definition of it, and how they need to come up with nimble approaches, governments, to combat this, working with social media companies. So this is a clarion call coming out from 2019. And what did we see play out post 3/11? It was exactly that. And I believe the Orwellian Ministry of Truth, aka the Trusted News Initiative, was key in that. So yeah. Could speak a lot about that too.
Yeah, you've spoken about something called the locked-in narrative. Now, who would you say?
The natural origin, yeah.
Yes.
Locking in the natural origin, yeah.
Correct. Now, who would you argue then are some of the key architects?
Yeah. So you have, you've got the likes of Sir Jerm Warfare, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Peter Daszak, who was obviously leading EcoHealth Alliance at the time, a lot of the gain of function research scientists like Ralph Barrick, who was recently in the news. All of those sort of elite scientists, I would say, were very instrumental to locking in the natural origin theory. And I would say that the joint statement in the Lancet, which was published February 2020, where you had 26 out of the 27 scientists who signed that, had deep ties with the Wuhan Institute of Virology or its funders. So, their conflicts of interests were never declared. And then you have the first two chapters of my book, Jeremy. I dissect thousands, these FOIA released emails. These are the Anthony Fauci emails, his correspondence with other scientists, all discussing how this virus looks engineered, like it's coming from a lab, but this is what they were discussing in private. But in public, it was a completely different story. It was them coordinating on this official narrative that it was a zoonotic virus coming, jumping from one species to another. And anyone discussing the lab origin theory would be condemned as a conspiracy theorist. The Lancet letter, the key statement of that letter is that we strongly condemn, anybody saying, that it's coming from a lab, then that's a conspiracy theory. So I really dissect those emails because they reveal so much, right? And so I thought that was critically important to do.
So invariably, I'm going to get feedback after this discussion from those in my audience who argue that there is no virus. You've obviously come across this kind of argument. What are your views on that?
Yeah, no, I understand that everybody is entitled to their views. Obviously, I wrote the book. It wasn't to disprove or, it wasn't to look at the foundational biology of virology, right? And to me, there is sufficient evidence that viruses do exist. SARS-CoV-2 has been isolated. You've got studies like the Yeo et al. Study where they isolated the virus. They looked at 11 patients and they were able to isolate the virus. But I think it's more about a bit of more of a diversion. It's like, what is the fallout? What was revealed? It's how governments around the world, how they responded, and how 311 was used as a, biosecurity overreach. So that's what I would say to your question.
A big portion of your research is Blotgate. What is that?
It's not a big portion of my research. There is a mention of it in the book, and I have done reporting on it. But Blotgate essentially is the Western blot assays that BioNTech submitted to the FDA, to the regulators, EMA, the regulator, to prove the fidelity of their product, to prove that their vaccinal their genomic, that the vaccine would produce the spike protein, right? So an anonymous individual, has provided me with that evidence showing that it looked completely fabricated and it looked like a copy and paste job. So this, I think, is really damning because it just shows that these shots, these mRNA shots, are they even producing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And obviously, the large portion of the book does talk about all the harms. These were branded as vaccines. mRNA technology it's a DARPA technology that from the, early 2000s, they were wanting to bring in. You have DARPA program manager going, what if we could create a vaccine that would just take, a few months and not wait 10 years? You have the Milken Institute panel happening in 2019, where you had Anthony Fauci on stage. You had Rick Bright, who was leading BARDA at the time, and a New York Times journalist discussing how we need to blow up. We need a disruptive event to blow up the traditional egg-grown vaccine process and bring in this new technology. They're talking about the mRNA technology. So this has been in the sort of wings for a long time. And this is another thing, a key thing that 311 ushers in. It ushers in this highly toxic, definitely not safe mRNA technology. And if we look at that, we see, BioNTech and Moderna pre-311 had failed to bring a single mRNA product to market. And the reason being, Jeremy, is because it failed all the safety testing. It couldn't get past phase 1 of the trials. And that they'd known from 2010s. Because of the toxicity issues, and not just the modified mRNA, right? This is not natural messenger RNA found in the body. This is synthetic. It's modified. And because of that, your body, when it's in it doesn't know what to do with it, right? So that's why you have a whole host of autoimmune issues coming out from these shots. These are gene-based shots. They're not vaccines. And they were misbranded for a reason, simply because if they would say this is a gene-based product, no one would have taken them. And then we've got the whole bait and switch thing going on. I don't know if you're aware of Pfizer's bait and switch. So this is and the book discusses this. So there were two different manufacturing processes used to make, this is for the Pfizer BioNTech shot. Process 1 was used in the kind of clinical trials, the sort of small scale batches that were made. And they were made completely differently to the process 2, which was basically what they made en masse, the large scale. This was rolled out to the public. All the clinical trials were made using process 1, not process 2. So if you think about it, the product they rolled out to the public was never really tested at all. Didn't even go through a clinical trial. Isn't that just so scandalous that the public were used as lab rats?
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. I remember in 2021, which was 5 years ago now, I can't believe it. I interviewed Luigi Warren, and he was one of the foundational mRNA biotech inventors at Moderna. And he no longer does interviews on this. And he at the time said that he would recommend against using this technology in your body.
Well, yeah. I'm glad he spoke out against it. Absolutely. And I haven't even discussed the lipid nanoparticles, because that is also another, toxic part of this vaccine. That was never, I can't say vaccine, shot or whatever, jab, whatever you want to call it. Two of those compounds, completely novel, never been tested never been used in a human product before, medicinal product, let alone injected, was involved, and again, the lipid nanoparticles themselves are highly inflammatory, highly toxic, and this was known. So a lot of the harms, and I write extensively on this, was known before the emergency use authorization was ever granted. So this is before December 2020. And I've got, there's a FDA slide that talks about this in a key meeting in October 2020 that discusses all the harm.
You've also highlighted the Cambridge paper, which yes. refers to mRNA. What did yes. you call it? Skipping.
So it's ribosomal frame shifting. So this is when the ribosomes come to read the modified mRNA. They can't, it slips. So you don't get, so what you're getting essentially is aberrant proteins, unintended off-target proteins are being produced in the body. So they don't even know what proteins are being properly expressed by these shots. And so the Cambridge study is a landmark study, even though they kind of dismiss the harms. Oh, yes, it could cause immunological events, but it's not dangerous. They do sort of, they sort of dismiss it. But the whole process 1, process 2, and the whole Blotgate scandal, which I write about, speaks to that. So it's deeply disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have your book yet because I'm at the bottom of Africa and everything takes longer, but I will have your book soon. So I'm going according to everything I've read on your Substack, which I highly recommend, by the way.
Thank you.
Just quickly, you mentioned frame shifting. For those who don't know what that means, what do you mean when you say frame shifting?
So, like I said, when the ribosomes come to read the modified mRNA, right, to then make the protein.
Sorry. Let's make it simpler.
Okay, the ribosomes. Well, I mean, do you want to have a science lesson? We could talk about that, or we could talk about the book. I mean, if you want to go into the...
I'm just saying, when you say ribosomes, so like to the average layperson.
So ribosomes read the mRNA to then to then make the protein. So they read the code. If you think about it, the code is like the software of a computer, right? And then, it goes to make the proteins in it, to make the proteins. So ribosomes are an integral part of that process. So when the ribosomes read the remember, this is synthetic messenger RNA. They can't, it's like a glitch that goes on. So think about it like a glitch, like it stalls, the proteins become misfolded. And again, you've got a whole host of maybe diseases coming from that, potentially Alzheimer's. And there are, I think Dr. Peter McCullough and Kevin McCurlin wrote a paper on that as well, discussing these host of harms. So it is very, it's problematic.
It's interesting you mentioned the whole operating system concept, because that's exactly what Moderna once upon a time had on their website. They spoke about an operating system and the software updates. They have since removed that.
Yeah, and how they wanted to hack the body, like this is like the hacking. Yeah, I mean, it's just really, and the way they just so flippantly talk about it, like, oh, it's just, and yeah.
Yuval Harari also said that.
Yeah. Yes, he did. He absolutely did. And, but the problem now we have, because these have been ushered in, greenlit, and, billions, billions have been made by the pharmaceutical industries. Let's not, mustn't forget that. But they have been rolled out, and it's sort of like people are now accepting of it. And we've got them wanting to push a lot more of these, mRNA based shots for the flu, for whatever it is. So it's just very, very, I would say it's a very dangerous technology. And
they want to create the ultimate vaccine.
Absolutely. Like a universal one, right? And what is really also kind of creepy, if you think about it, is like, obviously it was tried to treat cancers. This is how kind of BioNTech started, and Moderna, particularly BioNTech though. But if you think about it, they're creating a whole, we know there's a high risk of cancers coming out of the mRNA technology themselves. So you've got and we haven't even discussed the DNA contamination scandal, which I write a lot about in the book. I've interviewed Kevin McKernan and Jessica Rose and David Speaker, who wrote, really great papers on, independently in their labs, showing that these products are highly contaminated with billions to hundreds of billions of plasmid DNA. And that again that refers back to the process 1 versus process 2. They made process 2 with E. coli, with bacteria. That's how they got to make process, used, for making process 2, the products coming out of that. So that's why you have the plasmid DNA in the vials for both Moderna and for Pfizer and BioNTech's product too. And then you've got the whole risk of, it going into the nucleus of the cell, causing insertional mutagenesis, rise of cancers, and also it suppresses, I think it's called the P52 gene, which is your natural way of suppressing cancers, that it knocks out that gene. So you've got the rise of, turbo cancers, which a lot of doctors are talking about right now. And a lot of young people are getting cancers, which is very alarming.
Do you think BioNTech know about all of this? And if they do know, what does it mean ethically and legally?
Great question, Jeremy. Yeah. I mean, do they know? It's like, I think they're quite happy with their, the price of their stocks, their, what they've made from their most successful product ever, they would say financially for them. So do they know? Do they care? It's really hard for me to speak on intent. I can't get into their brains, but they knew the harms before, absolutely. So I think they probably know the harms now as well.
I guess that dovetails with the idea that the industry is completely captured.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit nail on the head there. You've got, regulatory capture, rampant regulatory capture. You've got, we know, and I'm sure your audience knows, that a lot of the funding for, from going to the regulators, they get it from the pharmaceutical companies, the fees that the pharmaceutical companies have to pay the regulators. So you have these, there's a chapter called The Blind Watchdogs that absolutely speaks to this. They are enablers, and you've got Dame June Rain, who heads up the UK's MHRA, saying that we need to turn from being a watchdog to being an enabler. And that's what they've essentially done. They've enabled the pharmaceutical industry to get away with, completely catastrophic harms.
Now, a lot of people know this. They will stay far away from not just mRNA, but all vaccines. I stay away from all vaccines now. My own child is not vaccinated. And what does this mean long term, though? I mean, are we going to see an increase in healthy people who are, let's say, no longer accepting these injections in their arms? And are we going to see a difference basically in society where we're going to see an increased number of sick people who continue believing in mRNA tech, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people who believe that, that's really going to help me, I'm really going to it will prevent me from getting whatever, the flu, for example, if I take this shot, or from COVID or whatever. I mean, it's really sort of hard to change because their mindset is so embedded with this is to help me. And also, a lot of these people are afraid, right? Fear tends to arrest your critical thinking skills. And that's one thing we haven't discussed is the weaponization of fear that was used, coming out of 3/11. And they're going to do that. So you will see some people getting very sick, which you are seeing evidence. We've got excess deaths going on, that hasn't gone away. And hopefully a lot of people, like you just said, like yourself, they will not use these products and they will remain healthy.
So that weaponization of fear is actually a really good theme, because that has been part of the psychological operation from day one.
Absolutely. So you have, and this does speak again to the Trusted News Initiative, because the whole censorship, they use fear, right? Which
included the BBC.
Absolutely. The BBC it helms the Trusted News Initiative. Absolutely. And so you have March 27th, which is an interesting date. And so just 2 weeks after the pandemic was declared, you have the Trusted News Initiative. Obviously, you've got the BBC doing a big article on this, stating how we are going to expand, our remit in a way where we're going to now counter COVID misinformation. So it's very interesting. They're preempting the dissent, right? They're preempting it by, we're going to counter disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. And you have the whole fact checking thing coming out of, the arbiters of truth, right? Which I discuss a lot there as well. But going back to the fear, the media were real culprits in that, the mainstream media on, we had the death tallies going on, how many people had died, how many people had tested for COVID. My book writes a lot about the whole PCR testing scandals, the lateral flow test scandals. But early on, we had a key meeting happen around March 2020. And my book, there's about over 140 exhibits in my book. So I have screenshots of papers, documents, emails, where you have behavioral scientists, advisors to the UK government, discussing how they need to, what can we do to get people to comply with these, these measures. And it's like, there's clearly states increase use the media to increase the sense of threat, and also consider use of social disapproval for failure to comply. So this is major psychological operations that we have. And then we have hundreds of millions. I don't know what it was like in South Africa, but do you remember all the billboards and messaging, government messaging?
Everywhere.
Absolutely. And isn't it interesting how, yeah.
Because that's how there's a deadly pandemic, where they have to hard sell it to you.
Exactly. You have to hard sell it. And so if you go out, grandma's going to die. If you go out, you're killed. It's just, so they literally scared people to death where they died in their homes because they were too afraid to go to hospital. But they died of, let's say, a heart attack or whatever it was, Or, some people did succumb and they got really bad pneumonia and their lips turned blue and, they couldn't breathe. And I mean, and then what they did in care homes, right? You have these end of life protocols that were dispatched in care homes. So, drugs given out to the elderly, like midazolam, morphine, and it's just really so many crimes went on. And so the book really chronicles everything. And I do look also at the suppression of early COVID treatment. So how hydroxychloroquine, how that drug was treated, ivermectin. And I looked at key studies. So you've got for hydroxychloroquine, you've got this key study being published in the Lancet that actually ends up being completely fake, but on faked data. And the study was showing that HCQ, hydroxychloroquine, is dangerous and it leads to cardiac issues, cardiac arrests. And this is a time when the same day the paper was published to sort of discredit hydroxychloroquine, you've got the BBC, New York Times, all doing articles like Trump's drug kills people. You have the Oxford University's Together trial suddenly discontinuing their hydroxychloroquine arm. You've got the World Health Organization discontinuing their HCQ arm as well. And the way the doctors were demonized, like Dr. Didier Raoult in Marseille, France, with his Marseille protocol, Vladimir Zelenko in Brooklyn, New York, and how they were treated. So they were demonized, blacklist, it's just, yeah. So, and obviously the same thing done with ivermectin. And so I look at all of that. So you have, it's a multi-pronged attack, essentially. And it was all used to usher in this technology, right? Because the one of the conditions that needs to be met to have the emergency use authorization granted is that there's no existing treatment for the disease.
But Sonia, we saw now in the UK, the Module 4 report that came out showing that the UK's vaccination program was a great success.
Yes. Well done for bringing that up. Exactly. So the COVID inquiry, so Module 4 comes out of the UK COVID inquiry, which I've written about extensively as well and critiqued it. It's just, I would say, one big whitewashing exercise, because all of that success, they say, is all based on modeling, right? And my book talks a lot about these modeling, how they're literally, for example, why we locked down was based on Professor Neil Ferguson's Report 9 coming out of Imperial College London, a well-known university here, heavily funded by the Gates Foundation. Ferguson himself has ties with Gavi, another Gates funded by the Gates Foundation on vaccines. So anyway, his paper Report 9, all based on modeling, all based on catastrophic predictions. Like if we don't lock down, millions are going to die. So the same thing used, these modeling predictions for, wasn't the vaccine such a success, such a savior? Completely, they don't, it's not the truth. It's not reality.
But the UK has also now implemented, or shall we say, rolled out a £1 billion pandemic plan.
Yes, which I was talking, I think I made you mention that earlier in the interview. Yeah, £1 billion being spent on, I think it's on all pandemics hazard bill, and it's to grant rapid emergency powers again, so if a pandemic is announced, so we're ready for the next one. So it's the same playbook. They're going to use the same playbook again. And my book dissects the playbook that was used over and over again, really. So
but
this is why it's relevant now.
Yes, but do you think they are going to attempt the same thing again?
I think, even from what we're seeing with hantavirus, we see all the media whipping up a lot of thing about it. Characters like Deborah Birx going on TV talking about, we got to use the PCR test to, it's just, they're just sort of whipping it up again. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future. And neither do I want to, but it looks that way, doesn't it? That they're sort of waiting for the next one. And I do hope that more people will be less afraid, right? So when it does come round again, they will not be panicking and, because they'll say, look, you must take this shot. You got to take, this vaccine to protect yourself from this, deadly virus. That's, when they knew early on that had a 0.1% infection fatality rate, 0.1% for those under 70, and which is comparable to maybe like a severe flu season. That was known, back in 2020.
My wife and I decided back then already that we were not going to legitimize any of this. And so we didn't even get a PCR test. To this day, I don't even know what a PCR test looks like.
Yeah. Well, I think that was very smart of you. And it's interesting that the inventor of the PCR technique, Dr. Carrie Mullis, you have him interviewed and saying, well, this test has never been, it's never designed for diagnosis or to tell you if you're sick. There's video interviews of him saying that. So the PCR protocol is a major scandal because this was the sort of multi-billion-dollar engine that was fueling lockdowns, right? And it's the reason why, it just prolonged the lockdowns. And we know it was heavily flawed. So this is the German virologist, Christian Drosten. So it was based on his paper with his, co-authors, and it got peer-reviewed in less than 24 hours.
By the WHO.
By the World Health Organization. Do you know when it was adopted, when it was January 13th? That's 3 days after the genomic sequence of SARS-CoV-2 was uploaded to virological.org. 3 days later, you have the World Health Organization adopting Drosten's PCR protocol.
Oh, wait. Wasn't that GenBank? I can't remember anymore. I think it was GenBank, eh?
Yeah, virological.org was uploaded by, it was Edward Holmes in China who uploaded it, yeah. And it's just, this was unvalidated. And there was actually an international consortium of 22 scientists led by Dr. Pieter Burger, I believe. And they condemned this PCR protocol, saying this is fundamentally flawed. And they came up with 10 flaws, scientific flaws. And they called for it to be, it should be completely withdrawn, this protocol.
I remember that. They submitted that to Eurosurveillance and it was rejected.
Yeah, and you would know why, because who's the editor of Eurosurveillance? It's Christian Drosten. And he's the lead author of that paper, along with and it's interesting because a few of these co-authors, again, they don't declare their conflicts of interest. They're tied to a Berlin company, that does testing kits, the PCR testing kit that was shipped out on January 10th. Wasn't that the same day the virus got uploaded? Somehow, January 10th, it gets sent to Hong Kong. A German paper picked that up, a newspaper. So I wrote about that, and there's a screenshot of that article. So have ties to Tib Mobile, which is, again, I'm talking this biotech company. They have ties to the authors of this paper. One of the authors runs that company. So it's just really, again...
Just a coincidence.
Yes, exactly. What a coincidence.
Just a coincidence.
Yeah. But you have these conflicts of interest just play out time and time again. So that's sort of a running theme of the book. And of course, the censorship as well. All the dissenting. We haven't really talked about the censorship of the science that happened. All those studies that got retracted, that were showing the effective use of whether ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, but also the harms. These are the harms of these novel shots, like that myocarditis paper by Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Jessica Rose happened to get withdrawn just a few days before the FDA were voting on the Pfizer shot for the lower age group, for the 5 to 11-year-olds. In September, October of 2021. It's crazy. And all those hidden harms. So I do a deep dive into all those Pfizer papers. I started reporting on that from late 2021 when they started to release. You remember the FDA got taken to court because a group of medical professionals in the US wanted to see, let's see all the documents that you guys greenlit this shot on. We want to see it for ourselves. They had to take them to court because the FDA wanted the public to wait till 2096, I believe. And what was in these documents was very damning. And I was writing about that many years ago. And of course, this is chronicled in my book, along with the periodic safety update reports that were submitted by BioNTech to the European Medicines Agency. I looked at pediatric deaths. These are children dying after the COVID shot, dying of myocarditis. These are healthy children. And guess what? No autopsies were being done. I mean, it's just such a crime. So, these are, very dense documents I was sort of wading through. And, a lot of screenshots are in the book of that. Harms to pregnant women, breastfeed. This is in the breast milk as well. They knew, it traveled to the breast milk. And remember the lie they told everyone that it just stays in your arm. It doesn't, because with the lipid nanoparticles, they travel all over the body. So, I document a lot. So this book is, I would say, an evidence-based, forensically researched book, over 941 citations as well. So I think it's a really good tool for, it's a great book to give to a friend or just to read, to know what really went on. And if everything I write about is, I find the evidence for, or else I wouldn't write about it.
It's impossible to capture the last few years and by extension, everything else that's connected to it, in the space of an hour. A big portion of the whole COVID event is, of course, mass surveillance and the spy state. And
Absolutely.
You've written about that too.
Yeah. I mean, this is what's really disturbing. You've got, powered by AI, artificial intelligence. So really, we're looking at a place where, in real time, people being tracked, monitored, what they're buying. Will they be rational? You bought too much bacon today, or your beef rations, or, we don't, or you've, the petrol you've used, that's your quota for the week. I mean, we don't know. It's very insidious. But yes, mass surveillance. And I really believe, for example, if we go look at vaccine passports, do you remember these? You had to show, many countries used these sort of vaccine passports. Those, I think that was the proof of concept for digital IDs to show it was going to work. People were going to comply. So people's fundamental freedoms, you can earn your freedom, right? If you comply. So this is deeply disturbing. And yeah, the digital ID landscape that we're in right now with the UK, we have, King Charles and his speech just the other day, yesterday, saying, my ministers will be introducing digital ID. This is after 3 million people, nearly 3 million people in the UK signed a petition against wanting digital ID. So it's being heavily pushed, heavily promoted, because I think at the end of the day, it gives the state ultimate control. And power and control, isn't this at the center of all of this?
I mean, we've got a few minutes left, and I like to also talk about silver linings, not just doom and gloom. I mean, it's a very dark topic. What do you think are some of the ways in which we can push back?
Yeah. I mean, I think, obviously knowing what really went on, the book is a vehicle for that. Knowledge and truth is the antidote to all of this, right? If you're armed with knowledge, truth, then it prepares you. So, but it's also to make people to accountability, right? There needs to be accountability. So and there hasn't been any, exactly. So this book was written more like a live indictment for it. It's not a post-mortem. It's like, these are all the crimes. This is all the evidence that I'm chronicling here. There needs to be accountability. And so people, or just to make people aware of really what went on and sort of lifting the veil, really. But I would say the silver lining is, definitely knowledge and truth, not to be afraid. And absolutely. Because when you're not afraid, they can't control you.
Yes. Well, I mean, I will add an anecdote and say, as I mentioned earlier, that I now no longer trust any vaccine, my own child. and next child will have no vaccines at all, because I don't think that there's a reason why you need to inject a baby in its arm for increased health. That just doesn't make any sense if you think of it like that. I mean, how did humans get by for thousands of years?
I know, exactly. Yeah. I mean, we have a God-given immune system, right? And I do believe these repetitive, the vaccines, it's destroying the immune system because it's making it go on hyperdrive, and you're getting again this highly, it's inflammation of the immune system. Then you've got a host of autoimmune diseases coming out of this. So it does attack the immune system.
I don't expect you to know the answer, but so it's more of a rhetorical question, Sonia, but it's something I've often thought about. The whole COVID event, and I agree with you, it's very important to talk about it because it's a placeholder for everything that's going on in the world in many ways. How much of it do you think was by design, by emergence, opportunistic actors?
Yeah. So in the beginning of my book is this key timeline starting from 2019. It's the appendix. And I think it's just so important, this timeline, because dates don't lie. And you can find a lot of anomalies when you look at dates, when things happened, right? And, you have these, like we were talking about those pandemic exercises. You had Crimson Contagion going on in the beginning of that year, led by Robert Cadleck, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cadleck, who was a key figure in this sort of rise of the biodefense industrial complex coming out from 9/11 as well. He's a key figure. So, but you also have that was it was called the Manhattan Project for Biodefense. And that happened, I think it was September 2019. And Robert Cadleck was on that panel. And they are demanding that, they are basically saying there needs to be, funding for biodefense. Like we need more money, so they're already saying, and we've got to go big or go home. And so it's already getting ramped up, this idea of we need funds in this industry. You have all those pandemic exercises going on. You have, for some reason, isn't it interesting, September 2019 at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, you have their major bat coronavirus database suddenly going offline, right? And there's a lot of anomalies. So I would say, and then the way the censorship, this TNI expanded its powers. Well, they were like preempting the dissent. Nothing speaks to it being organic. Nothing speaks to it being a normal response to a health event. What it speaks to is a coordinated, on a global scale, really, information operation, psychological operation.
Yeah. But then like a string puppet, where are the strings being pulled from? I mean, you have the Department of Defense, the CIA, you have the pharmaceutical industry, governments. Who's playing?
World Health Organization. Yeah. You've named many of the players there, right? And NGOs, we haven't even discussed that. Wellcome Trust, Gates Foundation. And then you've also got the CCDH, the Center of Countering Digital Hate. Right? That's been also in the news recently as well, because do you remember they came up with their Disinformation Dozen report back in 2021?
Yes.
I interviewed CIG, who actually happened to be one of the dozen, who were spreading anti-vax information. And they were responsible for many deaths. This is how it was being spinned, right? You had Biden at the time saying, Facebook's killing people because they wanted these accounts of these people to be brought down, to be deplatformed. But yeah, I mean, it's just really, it's a big machinery at work.
What do you think Trump knew?
Good question. I'd like to get into his mind and know what he knew. But I mean, obviously he was behind Operation Warp Speed. I don't think properly acknowledges the harms at all of the mRNA technology. Perhaps maybe other vaccines I know he's a bit skeptical of, but the mRNA technology, no, I don't. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see more accountability there, absolutely. Because, yeah, it was warp speed ahead, wasn't it? That was all about, getting it approved as quickly as possible. And again, this speaks to DARPA's P3 platform, which was developing a vaccine within 60 days. And if you think about with Moderna's timeline, they managed to get from genomic sequence to being for human trials 63 days. So they did meet that. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I don't know what to make of Trump. I kind of see him just as this blockhead who doesn't know enough about what is going on, trusts his advisors, and just wants to win.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a good opinion to have of him. I don't, yeah, I mean, yeah, I would like to see more accountability.
Yes.
This is what but to get into people's minds,
no, for sure.
Can't do that.
But do you think, as Catherine Austin Fitz says, that RFK, by joining the government now, is unfortunately captured?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, don't know the answers to all of this. How it's not fair for me to sort of give like, oh, he's captured. I do respect RFK a lot, RFK Jr., and what he's done and promoting health and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think when you get to the top, your hands become quite tied. Yeah. But I was very happy when he was made head of HHS. I thought brilliant. Much better than Alex Azar, right? Who was this is when Operation Warp Speed, and remember that was evoked the liability shields, right? The PrEP Act was very early on. This is way before this is I think early 2020, February 4th. The PrEP Act was invoked by Alex Azar. So they were already wanting to protect very early on the vaccine manufacturers. So really the big thing here is to get that lifted, right? There needs to be because if you think about it, if you're making a car, any other product, if there's no sort of scope for you to get sued if your product is dangerous, what incentive is there for a company to make their product safe? There is absolutely no incentive.
All right. I'm looking at the time, Sonia. How can I follow your work?
So people can follow me on X at Sonia_Elijah. I also have a Substack, Sonia Elijah Investigates. And I've also written this book, 311 Viral Takeover, which I recommend. A good read and to give to a friend as well. So, that's how you can find me. And I really appreciate the time today for you interviewing me, Jeremy.
It's an absolute pleasure. Sonia Elijah, thank you for joining me in the trenches.